Hi, I'm Raj. If you haven't been to my channel, it's great to see you here. Social logins like Gmail and GitHub are really important for your app. They help a lot with conversions, so that means more people would choose to sign up for your apps. And behind the scenes, most social logins implement something called OAuth 2.0 along with OpenID Connect. OAuth is a protocol, or more like a set of instructions on how to set up secure authorization flow, and OpenID Connect is a small implementation on top of OAuth that ensures authentication by returning an ID token. OAuth also unlocks third-party service integrations and not just login, and this is a really important use case for OAuth. If you've ever used cal.com, you can see that after you log in, you can install apps in your app store, and these installed apps are just mostly OAuth integrations. If you want to build third-party integrations in your app, then you really need to understand what happens in an OAuth flow. You need to know how to deal with things like access token, refresh token, access token expiry, and also session tokens. With that being said, in this content, we're going to take a deep dive into understanding OAuth by building a simple Next.js app. In this app, we will set up a Google OAuth with Next-auth library and also access our Google Calendar API to fetch the next 10 meetings. As this content is more of a deep dive, I'm going to break it down into subsections so it's easy for you to understand. First, we will talk about the implementation detail for the OAuth 2.0 flow for our app. In the next step, we're going to set up Google credentials to use OAuth. And then we will set up our Next.js app with Next-auth and use Google as the provider. And then we're going to talk about saving access tokens in the session cookie after login. And then we will talk about how we can use the access tokens to get meetings from our Google Calendar API. And finally, we will talk about how we can handle the expiry of access tokens. The app that we're building covers all the scenarios in an OAuth flow. So that means the user should be able to do three things. First, the user has to finish the login flow, get authenticated, and get access tokens. Then we have to use the access tokens to fetch the data from the resource server. If the access token expires, then we need to refresh the access tokens using refresh tokens. Let's go into details of each step. In the login flow, when the user tries to sign in with Google OAuth provider, our Next.js app server forwards a request to Google Auth server with client's ID, scope, and callback URLs. The scope for us would be the Google Calendar, and we will see how to set up client's ID and callback URLs later. Once hit, the Google Auth server responds with a redirect to a page where the user can enter Google's email or password or select a Google account, and also give consent to the app to get access to their resource server. In our case, it's the Google Calendar. After the consent, the Google Auth server will call our callback URL with a code that will hit our Next-auth's callback URL route. And our Next.js server will use the code to request access token, refresh token, access token expiry, and ID tokens from Google Auth server. Access tokens are used to get data from resource servers, and refresh tokens are used to get new access tokens when they expire. Once done, the app server validates ID token to confirm authentication and extracts basic user information from the ID token and encodes the information in a JWT and saves it in form of HTTP-only cookie on the client side. This cookie can't be accessed by JavaScript. That means you can't see it when you run document.cookie. Not only the basic information, but you can also save access token and refresh token information as part of the HTTP-only session cookie. And this cookie will be sent back to our app server when the client makes a request, and we can use it to extract our stored information like access token, refresh token, etc., instead of saving it in a database. And also when the user reloads the app, this cookie is checked, and if it's valid, then we assume that the user is already logged in. If it's hard for you to imagine this, don't worry, I will show it to you in detail when we actually build the app. Once the login flow is done and we have saved our access token, it's time for us to use this access token to fetch the information from our resource server. If you have an API called fetch calendar events in our Next.js app server, and when we call this API, we get the cookie information on the server, extract access token information from the cookie, and use the access token along with client ID and client secret to call the Google Calendar API to get a response. And finally, every time we use our session token cookie on the server, we also check if our access token is expired. If it has expired, then we use a refresh token to fetch new access token and refresh token and update the information in the session cookie. The access tokens should usually have a small expiry value for the sake of security, and we use a refresh token to periodically update access tokens without logging the user out. You'll have to keep in mind that when I talk about session cookie, I'm talking about the session token cookie. This covers all the use cases for our app, and now it's time to build it. Right before we go ahead and build our app, let's set up Google OAuth, client ID, client secret, and scope of our client. So for that, I'm going to make a new project, and I'm going to name it sample project. All right, so now we have a new project. And after I'm inside, I'm going to click on Enable APIs and Services. So we have to enable Calendar API for our sample project. So I'm going to search for Calendar. I'm going to enable Calendar API for this project. And after that, I want to set up my OAuth consent screen. So for that, I'm going to click on OAuth consent screen and click External. I'm going to give a sample app, Next-auth tutorial, and I'm going to add my email for support. And I'm going to use the same email for the developer contact. All right, so now I'm going to save and continue. And you can see that we can add scopes. So for that, I'm going to add the Google Calendar as a scope and OpenID, email, and profile. So these are the basic scopes. And I'm going to add them as well. And update. Now we've got all our scopes in place. I'm going to save and continue. And we're going to add a test user. So the test user is just going to be our email. And I'm going to add it as well. And now, once this is done, I'm going to go to credentials and I'm going to create credential. I'm going to click OAuth client ID. The app type is going to be web app. I'm going to click that. Inside this, we're going to add authorize redirect URI. So our app is going to run on localhost. We're going to use Next-auth. So for the Next-auth, it needs to be API auth callback / Google. So I'm going to add API auth callback / Google. So that looks good. And I'm going to click create. So we have our client ID and client secret. I'm going to copy them both. You can see that if I click on the OAuth consent screen, our app is going to be in the testing mode. If you want to publish this app, then you'll have to go through another few steps and they'll have to approve it as well. So it's going to take a lot of time for you. So for now, we're just going to use testing and we can test for these users. So if you want more users to test, then you can also add more users for testing. With this, our Google OAuth setup is done. Now that we've set up our Google OAuth and got our client ID and client secret, it's time for us to set up our Next.js app with Next-auth.js. For this tutorial, we're going to use the Next-auth example and clone the code of Next-auth example. So this is the app that we're going to clone. And first thing, what we're going to do is we're going to do an npm install. And right before that, I want to make sure that we have latest Next Canary version. Next-auth is in beta as well. Now I'm going to do an npm install. While it's installing, I'm going to go and create my .env local file. And let's set up our env local file. I'm going to get this key here and I'm going to copy that as an auth secret. We're going to use Google ID and Google Secret. So I'm going to remove all the other things. Got my client ID and client secret from the last step. And now I'm going to do some cleanup. So you can see that they've got a pretty big app and we don't really need all these things. And we just need a simple page.tsx And we also need one API auth route for the Next-auth. So I'm going to remove everything else. I've done some cleanup, and let me just explain you what I've done. So we have a file for the layout, and we have one for page. I also have this API auth/Next-auth. So this is required for Next.js library. And inside this file, we have this handlers method imported from auth. And then we also have get and post handlers from handlers. Inside auth.ts file, we have entire setup for our authorization config with all the callbacks involved. And we will come back to this in a bit. And we also have a file called middleware.ts file. And inside here, you can see that with auth method from auth.ts file. And that's it. So now let's go back to auth.ts and set this up for Google. So instead of GitHub, I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to keep only Google for now, and I'm going to remove all these things. So we don't technically have to pass all the client ID and client secret because it knows to get it from these environment variable. We're only going to pass the other authorization params. So first thing that we need to add is access type offline and prompt consent. So this access type offline is required so that Google can send the refresh token every time we sign in. So if you don't add this, it will only give you the refresh token on the first sign in. And the prompt consent means every single time we sign in, we need to be shown the consent screen. And on top of that, we're also going to add all our scopes. So these are the scopes that we need. The scopes that we selected for our user profile. Also, the response type needs to be in form of code. This tells Google OAuth that it needs to call our callback URL with a code. And we will use this code to get access token and the refresh tokens. All right, that's pretty much it. Our base path is not going to be auth. It's actually API/auth. I'm going to update that here. And then we have this authorized. So what we're going to do is instead of having all these checks, we're just going to check if there is a session, then we assume that the user is authorized. If there is no session, then the user is not authorized. And we have a JWT token. And this JWT token is the one that will be saved inside the session cookie. And also, we have a callback for session. And this is the session object. And we can set any information that we want. And this will appear on our client side. We can try and test our app to see if this works. We are being redirected to a sign-in page because of the fact that we're not authorized. All right, so for now, we don't really have our session cookie. That means we're not logged in. So now I'm going to click sign in. And I'm going to be taken to the email selection page. And you can see that this is more of a test app. So I'm going to click continue. And I'm going to click continue again. It's asking for consent to access my calendar. So I'm going to click OK and click continue. All right, so that looks good. So you can see that we sent the session object from the server, and every value that I set in the session callback can be seen on my session object. Yeah. And on top of that, you can see that we have the session cookie or the session token cookie. And this is a jot. And the value of this jot is basically what we return from here. So what we do is we typically throw this session token around from the client to server to exchange and save values. So we use this token as a store of value. Now let's go ahead and fix a few more things. When the user logs in for the first time, we have this account object that contains practically everything that we need. I'm going to go to the jot callback because this will be called before this callback. So this is the place for us to update. And I'm going to check if the account and the user information is valid. If they are valid, then I'm going to extract access token from them. And also you can check how the ID token looks like just by extracting it from here. Now, our session token also contains all this information that we returned from here. So let's print more items. For example, if I go to session.access token, also session.token expiry, refresh token, session.id token, and I go and refresh the app, you can see that we've got all the things that we need. And also normally you can't really store the ID token in the session token because of the fact that it's actually usually really big. And if I grab this ID token and try to decode it, you can see that it's got all the information of my accounts and my email, etc. Now I go back to my app and remove ID token because I don't really need it. I only need access token to access my Google Calendar. We're going to create a new component inside components, and I'm going to call it calendar component.tsx. This component would be a client component. It contains a button and a state, and the state contains all the events or the meetings in our calendar. And this will also call our API called fetch calendar events. And we get all the events from the API and store this information. Now it's time for us to set up our API. I'm going to go to API and create a new folder called fetch calendar events. And inside, I'm going to have route.ts. And before that, I have to install 2 more libraries called Google APIs and Google Auth library. And I'm going to import all this information and this auth method from auth.ts file. I'm just going to have a get handler. I'm going to get the session information from auth. So this will give us back the session information. A quick note before we go on. The new auth method in the Next-auth V5 is supposed to give us the information returned from the JWT callback without exposing the information through session callback. Because the data returned by the session callback can be accessed on our client side by means of useSessionHook. But it looks like they have a bug and it's returning the session callback's payload instead of JWT's payload. Until they have a new fix for this, try to store the refresh token in the database so that you don't expose them accidentally to the client side. And just for the sake of this tutorial, I will go ahead and add both the access token and the refresh token in the session callback. But please don't do this in prod environments and always keep them inside JWT callback or store them inside a database. If the session is not valid, then it's going to be unauthorized. So now in the step, we're going to extract all the information from the session. So I think we also have to pass a refresh token. So I'm going to go back to auth.ts and save the refresh token in the session. I'm going to create my OAuth 2 client. And once I create the client, I'm going to set the credentials. And after that, I'm going to create my calendar client with OAuth 2 client. From the calendar client, I'm going to get my next 10 meetings. And I'm going to extract them into events and send them in a response. I'm going to run npm run dev. And you can see that we've got the access token and the refresh token as part of the session object. And we also need to add this calendar component inside our page.tsx. Right underneath, the session object and refresh and click on Fetch Calendar Events. All right, so you can see that I've got 10 events in my calendar, and I was able to fetch all of them at the same time. Cool, so this seems to be working. So when the access token expires, it usually has a really small expiry time. The client would silently fail if we try to hit the calendar API with the access token. So for that, we're going to use this concept called refresh token rotation. And what it does is it uses the refresh token to get new access tokens for us without us trying to re-sign in. So this is a really interesting piece of code. So you just have to copy this whole thing and paste it inside your JWT callback. What I've done is I've just copied the information that you see here and also made some code updates. So first thing, what I've done is I've just extracted the access token and also the refresh token from the account information. In the account, we also get a value for expires in. This value is in seconds, and usually this is 3,600 seconds. And what I'm doing is I'm just multiplying that by 1,000 in order to get the milliseconds. I'm going to add it to date.now timestamp. In the next step, we check token.expireSat. So that means we check for this value when this JWT is called again. At the time this is called again, the account will be undefined. Only token will be available from the session token cookie that we have set on the client side. And if somehow the access token is expired, then we enter this condition, and then we use the refresh token and the client's ID and the client secret to get new access tokens. And we do the same thing again. We update the access token information and the expireSat information, and also the refresh token information, and return this whole thing. This whole thing will be updated inside our session token cookie. Next time when this method is called, these new values that you see here will be available as part of the token. And also, I've just fixed my session method in order to fix all the TypeScript issues, and also made a new type called enrich session and export the same. And now if I come back to raw.ts file and use the new session type, you can see that we've also fixed our TypeScript issues that we faced here. And also I go to page.tsx file and use the new session type. Also on top of that, I'm going to access the value of the token expiry and the token issue date and convert them to the local date of the browser and print them. That looks good. And that's pretty much it. So now if I go back to my app, I get all the information that I need. So for example, the token was issued at 11:56 and it will be expiring in an hour. And if I click on Fetch Calendar Events, I can fetch all my next 10 events that I have on my calendar. And now if I go and check my cookie, you can see that this cookie is our session cookie. And this is also the proof that we are logged in. And if I delete this cookie and reload, you can see that we are logged out. Just as I've said before, do not return all the token values from session callback. And I've only done this to circumvent the bug that I talked about, and also for the sake of simplicity. If you're using Next-auth V5, use database to store your tokens for now until this bug is fixed, and also keep an eye on this PR. If you're using Next-auth V4, you can use getToken method to directly access the incoming JWT without storing them in the session callback and accidentally exposing it to the client. And that's pretty much it. So we've just implemented all the flows that we just talked about including handling of expired access tokens. This marks the end of our content, and if you've got any questions or comments, drop them in the comment section below, and I will try to answer them as much as possible. Thanks for watching, and if you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe for more, and I will talk to you soon.